5 signs a narcissist is deeply suffering. They never show it. That is the whole point. But underneath that polished surface, something is rotting. And today, you are going to see exactly what that looks like. Most people spend years trying to figure out why a narcissist acts the way they do. They twist themselves into knots trying to make sense of the cruelty, the silence, the sudden explosions, the cold withdrawal. And what nobody tells you is that a lot of what you are experiencing from them has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with a pain they cannot name, cannot feel, and will never admit to. This is not a video that lets narcissists off the hook. Understanding their suffering does not excuse what they do to you, but it does give you something more powerful than anger. It gives you clarity, and clarity is what finally sets you free. So if you have ever looked at someone who hurt you and thought, why? How can they not feel anything? How can they just move on like nothing happened? Stay with me. Because what I am about to show you is going to completely shift how you see this entire dynamic. Before we go further, if you are watching this and you already sense what is underneath someone in your life, drop the word buried in the comments right now. Just that one word, buried, because that is exactly where their pain lives. And you already knew that before this video started. Now let us get into it. Sign number 1, they cannot be alone, ever. Watch a narcissist closely when they have nothing to do and no one around. Really watch them, because what you will see is not peace. It is not contentment. It is not someone who is comfortable in their own skin. What you will see is something that looks a lot like panic dressed up as boredom. They pick up their phone compulsively. They scroll without actually looking. They start making calls they do not need to make. They manufacture reasons to be somewhere, to be with someone, to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged. And if none of those things are available to them, they start to unravel in ways they would never let you see clearly. Now here is the thing most people miss. When a narcissist cannot be alone, the automatic assumption is that they are just social, that they love people, that they thrive in company. But that is not what is happening. Being social means you enjoy others. What a narcissist is doing is something completely different. They are escaping themselves. The reason silence terrifies them is because silence is where the truth lives. And the truth about a narcissist, the truth they built their entire personality to avoid, is that deep down, underneath all the bravado and the performance and the control, there is a profound sense of emptiness, a void, a feeling that if they stop moving, stop talking, stop performing, stop being seen, they will simply disappear. Not physically, but in every way that matters to them. Think about that. Imagine waking up every single day and having to immediately reach for something outside yourself just to feel real. That is not a life of confidence. That is a life of constant emergency. And the tragic part is that narcissists are often incredibly gifted at manufacturing connection. They can walk into a room and within minutes have everyone laughing, leaning in, hanging on every word. They know how to mirror people. They know how to make you feel like you are the most interesting person they have ever met. And for a moment in that exchange, the void goes quiet. The emptiness gets filled just enough to keep going. But the moment the room empties, the moment the applause stops, the moment you look away, that emptiness comes rushing back, louder than before. This is why narcissists cycle through relationships so quickly. Not because they are evil by design, though the impact on you can absolutely be devastating, but because each person, each new source of attention and admiration, can only fill the void for so long before it stops working, before tolerance builds, before they need a new hit of something to keep the internal noise from getting too loud. And so they move on, not because you were not enough, but because nothing is ever enough for a wound that size. The inability to be alone is one of the clearest signs that someone is suffering beneath the surface. Because healthy people, people who genuinely like themselves, can sit in silence without it feeling like a death sentence. They can be in an empty room and not feel the walls closing in. They can go an afternoon without needing someone to validate that they exist. A narcissist cannot do that, and they know they cannot do it. And that knowing, that awareness somewhere deep in their system that something is fundamentally wrong with how they experience themselves is its own kind of torture. You just never get to see the torture. You only get to see the performance they built to keep it hidden. Sign number 2. Their anger is completely disproportionate. You have probably seen this. Maybe you have lived it. You say something completely ordinary. You make a small comment. You point out something minor. You ask a simple question. And suddenly the room changes. The temperature drops. Or it explodes. And what comes back at you is something completely out of proportion to what just happened. You said the wrong thing at dinner, and now you are being screamed at. You questioned a small decision, and now you are being told everything that is wrong with you as a person. You forgot to do something minor, and now you are being punished with silence for days. And you are standing there thinking, what just happened? What did I do? Because the punishment does not match the crime. It never does with a narcissist. Here is what is actually going on in that moment. When you said that thing, that ordinary, harmless thing, it did not land the way you intended it. It landed on something much older, something underneath the surface that has been sitting there for decades in some cases. Something that goes all the way back to the first time they were told they were not enough, or the first time they were humiliated, or the first time they reached out for love and got cruelty back instead. Narcissists live in a state of what psychologists sometimes call narcissistic injury on a near constant basis. The ego they built, that massive, fortified, seemingly unshakable ego, is actually extraordinarily fragile. It is like a castle made of glass, looks impenetrable from the outside, shatters from the inside at the smallest pressure. And so when something threatens that glass castle, when your words or your actions create even the smallest crack in the image they have constructed of themselves, the response is not proportionate. It cannot be, because they are not responding to what you said. They are responding to every single time before this that felt the same way. Every humiliation, every rejection, every moment where the mask slipped and someone saw what was underneath and looked away. The rage is pain. That is the part nobody says out loud. The cold silence is pain. The sudden withdrawal is pain. The attacks on your character, the twisting of your words, the gaslighting, the punishment, all of it is pain wearing a different costume. Because pain in a narcissist almost never comes out looking like pain. It comes out looking like power, because power is the only language they trust. They learned somewhere very early on that being vulnerable meant being destroyed, that crying meant weakness, that asking for help meant being laughed at. And so they buried all of that. They built walls, they built armor, they built an entire alternate self to stand between them and the world so that nothing could get through. And the rage is what lives at the gate of those walls. It is the security system. The moment anything gets close to touching what is real, the alarm goes off. And what comes at you feels like an attack. Because in their mind, in the distorted, wounded, terrified part of their mind, it is an attack. You are a threat, not because you meant to be, but because you got close to something they cannot afford to feel. Now, does that mean you should stay and absorb the rage? Absolutely not. Understanding what it is does not mean you have to receive it. But when you understand that their anger is a symptom and not a verdict on who you are, something changes in you. The shame that narcissists are so skilled at installing starts to lose its grip because you realize you were never really the problem. You were just the nearest surface when the internal earthquake hit. Sign number 3. They are obsessed with how they look to others. And I do not mean physically, although that can be part of it. I mean they are consumed, driven, almost entirely organized around the question of what do people think of me? What is my reputation? How am I being perceived? Am I winning? Am I being seen as successful? Am I being respected? Am I being admired? This is not ambition. Ambition feels good to the person experiencing it. This is closer to compulsion. It is an anxiety that never fully goes away, regardless of how much recognition they get. Because the recognition, just like the social connection, just like the company they surround themselves with, is a substance. And the tolerance keeps building. And the dose has to keep going up. Watch how a narcissist responds to praise and compare it to how they respond to criticism. Not just obvious criticism, subtle criticism, an unenthusiastic reaction, a less enthusiastic response to something they shared, someone else getting recognized in a room they are in, a moment where they are not the center. The response is almost always immediate and almost always disproportionate. Because the external validation is not something they enjoy, it is something they need to survive. And when it is withheld, even slightly, the withdrawal symptoms kick in immediately. This obsession with image is suffering in one of its most relentless forms, because it means there is no rest. There is no moment where they can just exist without performing. There is no interaction that is simply about connection. Every conversation is a calculation. Every relationship is a transaction. Every room they walk into is a stage, and they have to perform on that stage every single time without fail, because the moment they stop performing is the moment the curtain falls and what is behind it gets exposed. And what is behind it, the thing the performance exists to hide, is a self they were taught from very early on was unworthy, unlovable, deficient in some fundamental way, and they believed it. Somewhere in that fortress of ego is a small, terrified person who genuinely believes they are broken. And every single thing they do, every achievement, every seduction, every performance of superiority is a way of trying to prove that belief wrong without ever having to look at it directly. That is exhausting. That is the kind of exhaustion that does not go away with sleep, the kind that accumulates over years and decades into something that feels like a permanent state of siege. You can sometimes see it in flashes, a moment where the mask slips just slightly and something tired and sad looks back at you before it gets pulled back behind the curtain. Most people never notice that moment, or they notice it, and then the narcissist does something to make them forget they saw it. But it happens, and it is real, and it tells you more about what is actually going on than anything they say or perform. Sign number 4, they are terrified of intimacy. This one is subtle, and it often gets missed because narcissists can be incredibly charming in the early stages of relationships. They can seem deeply connected, intensely interested, amazingly attuned to exactly who you are and what you need. And that early intensity often feels like intimacy. It feels like being really seen by someone. But it is not intimacy, it is mirroring. And there is a crucial difference. Intimacy requires vulnerability, real vulnerability, the kind where you let someone see the parts of you that are uncertain, the parts that have been hurt, the parts that feel small and scared sometimes, the kind of vulnerability that says, this is who I actually am, not just who I want you to think I am. And intimacy requires tolerating the discomfort of being truly known by another person, which means tolerating the possibility that they might look at what is real and choose to leave. A narcissist cannot do that, not because they are incapable of connection on a human level, but because the cost of that kind of exposure in their internal calculus is catastrophic. To be truly known is to be truly seen, and to be truly seen means the false self falls away. And if the false self falls away, there is nothing left but the broken thing underneath. The thing they spent their whole life building walls to hide. And so, what looks like intimacy in a narcissistic relationship is always performance, always control. The love bombing in the beginning is not genuine connection. It is a very sophisticated way of getting close without actually being close, of seeming to give everything while actually taking everything, of creating the illusion of knowing someone while maintaining a carefully managed distance from being known themselves. And when real intimacy starts to develop, when the relationship deepens to the point where you might actually start to see them clearly, where the cracks start to show and the mask starts to slip, that is when the relationship changes. That is when the devaluation often starts. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you got too close to what is real. And what is real cannot be allowed to exist in the light. The push and pull that so many people describe in relationships with narcissists, that cycle of closeness and sudden cold distance, that pattern of drawing you in and then shutting you out, that is not a game. It is not manipulation for the pure pleasure of manipulation. There is a pain underneath it. There is a person who desperately wants connection and simultaneously cannot survive it, who is drawn to intimacy like a moth to light and then terrified when they get close enough to feel the heat. That internal war between the hunger for real connection and the terror of what real connection requires is one of the most painful things a human being can experience. And narcissists experience it in every relationship they have, and they have absolutely no tools to resolve it, because resolving it would require them to do the one thing they have built their entire psychological architecture to avoid: to feel the truth about themselves without running from it. Sign number 5. Nothing is ever enough. This is perhaps the most telling sign of all, and it is the one that reveals the suffering most clearly once you know what you are looking at. Give a narcissist what they want. Watch what happens. They get the promotion, and within days, they are already fixated on the next one. They get the praise, and it barely registers before they are looking for more. They win the argument, and instead of feeling satisfied, they are already constructing the next one. They get the relationship, and instead of feeling content, they are already scanning for what is wrong with it, what is missing, what is not quite right. This is not greed. I want you to really hear that, because the easy interpretation is that narcissists are simply greedy, simply entitled, simply incapable of gratitude. And while those things can look true from the outside, what is actually happening is far more complicated and far more painful. The void does not fill. That is the truth underneath this behavior. No matter what goes in, no matter how much success, how much admiration, how much control, how much supply, as some people call it, nothing stays, nothing satisfies. The emptiness is not a cup that can be filled from the outside, because the hole is not in the cup. The hole is in the foundation. And somewhere on some level, a narcissist knows this. They may not be able to articulate it. They may not even be consciously aware of it, but the body knows, the nervous system knows. And what it registers as is a kind of relentless, exhausting, suffocating hunger that never gets answered no matter how much they consume. Think about what that must feel like, to achieve something you wanted desperately and feel nothing lasting from it. To be admired by people you worked hard to impress and still feel empty afterward. To win repeatedly in every way that the world recognizes as winning, and still feel like something is fundamentally missing, still feel like something is wrong, still feel the hollow echo of that original wound that says you are not enough and you never will be. That is suffering. That is a very specific and very relentless kind of suffering. And the tragedy is that the strategies narcissists use to try to escape it actually make it worse. Every relationship they drain becomes another relationship lost. Every person they hurt becomes someone who eventually leaves or shuts down. Every achievement they dismiss becomes another hollow victory that confirms what they are most afraid of: that nothing from the outside can fix what is broken on the inside. And they cannot stop. That is the part that really gets to the core of this. They cannot stop the cycle. Not without help they almost never seek. Not without a willingness to feel what they have spent decades learning not to feel. Not without dismantling a self that, as painful as it is to maintain, is the only self they know how to be. Now, here is why all of this matters for you. If you have someone like this in your life, or if you are trying to make sense of someone like this from your past, the natural human instinct is to want them to see what they are doing, to want them to acknowledge the pain they caused, to want some form of recognition that what happened was real and that it hurt. And that instinct makes complete sense. You deserve that acknowledgement. But here is what I need you to understand. A narcissist in full armor, a narcissist who has not done the deep internal work, which most of them never do, is genuinely incapable of giving you that. Not because they do not feel anything. We have just spent this entire video establishing that they feel plenty. But because the acknowledgement you are looking for would require them to lower the drawbridge, to let what is real come to the surface. And that is the thing the entire fortress was built to prevent. Waiting for that acknowledgement is one of the most painful places you can live, because it can feel so close sometimes. There are moments where something flickers behind their eyes, moments where something almost breaks through. And that almost is enough to keep you waiting. Enough to keep you hoping that this time will be different, that this time they will really see it. And I say this with complete compassion for where you are. That hope is costing you something. Every day you wait for someone to give you something they are structurally unable to give you, you are borrowing time from your own life, from your own healing, from the version of you that could be moving forward. Understanding their suffering is not the same as accepting their behavior. It is not the same as staying. It is not the same as forgiving in the way that lets them back in. Understanding their suffering is a tool for you. It is a way to stop making their dysfunction about your worth, to stop internalizing their cruelty as evidence of your deficiency, to see the situation clearly so that your decisions come from clarity instead of confusion. Because clarity is the one thing a narcissist works hardest to take from you. The constant rewriting of reality, the gaslighting, the push and pull, the cycles of idealization and devaluation, all of it serves the same function. To keep you uncertain enough that you never quite trust your own perception. To keep you focused on fixing the relationship instead of seeing it. When you finally see it, really see it, something shifts. The spell breaks. Not dramatically, not all at once in most cases, but fundamentally. You start to recognize what is yours and what belongs to them. You start to feel the difference between your actual self and the person their behavior was slowly convincing you that you were. And that recognition, that moment of clear sight, is where you begin to come back to yourself. Now, I want to say something about the 5 signs we just covered because I think there is one more layer worth looking at. The narcissist who cannot be alone is telling you that they have never learned to be a safe place for themselves. The narcissist whose anger is disproportionate is telling you that they were never taught any other language for pain. The narcissist obsessed with image is telling you that somewhere along the way they learned that their true self was not acceptable. The narcissist terrified of real intimacy is telling you that vulnerability was never safe for them. And the narcissist for whom nothing is ever enough is telling you that they are running from an emptiness they have never once sat still long enough to face. None of that is your fault. None of that is yours to fix. And none of that is a story that ends well unless they choose completely of their own accord to do something almost impossibly difficult, to stop running, to feel what is real, to dismantle what was built for survival and try to construct something that allows for genuine living. Most will never make that choice, not because they are beyond help in some abstract sense, but because the pain of what that process would require is something the protective self cannot tolerate, and the protective self is very, very good at its job. What that means for you is that the path forward is not through them. It is not in waiting for them to change. It is not in saying the right thing or loving them harder or understanding them so thoroughly that they finally feel safe enough to show you what is real. The path forward is around them, through yourself, back to the clarity they worked so hard to take from you. If you are carrying something from this kind of relationship, something that got stuck inside you from all those cycles and contradictions and moments of hope followed by crushing disappointment, know that what got stuck can also come loose. Not all at once, not without effort, but it can. The people who do the work of untangling themselves from relationships like this consistently say the same thing on the other side, that they found something they did not expect to find, not just relief, not just the absence of pain, something more solid, a sense of who they actually are beneath everything that was layered on top of them during that relationship. A self that is quieter than the performing one, but far more real. A capacity for connection that is actual connection rather than the performance of it. That is available to you. That is where this understanding is supposed to point you. Not towards sympathy that becomes a leash. Not toward understanding that becomes an excuse to stay in something that is taking from you. But toward a clarity so complete that your next step becomes obvious. And your healing becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Because you were never the broken one in this dynamic. You were the one who stayed open long enough to be hurt. And staying open is not a weakness. It is the thing that makes real love possible. It is also the thing that made you vulnerable to someone who exploited it. The goal is not to close. The goal is to be open in the right places, to the right people, with the right information about what you are actually dealing with. And that starts with exactly what you just did. You chose to understand instead of staying confused. You chose to see instead of staying blind. That matters more than you know. That is the beginning of everything.